Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Create Connects. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that all of us here are located somewhere on Aboriginal land across this vast place now called New South Wales. I live and work on Gadigal and Bidjigal lands and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I invite you to, in the chat box, you can tell us where you're coming from today. My name is Beck Dean and I'm Acting Senior Manager of Policy and Partnerships at Create New South Wales. My colleague Ashley Collis is on this platform to help us moderate your questions as we go. And so that we can focus on our speakers, we ask you that you mute your microphones and turn off your cameras. And there's some little instruction here for a better viewing experience. You can click on View Active Cameras. And we do invite you to use the chat box on the right-hand side. It's where that speech bubble is at the top. You can activate it by just clicking on that, and you can put your questions or comments in there. Please feel free to say hello and introduce yourselves. There's also some great people at AI Media who are captioning this webinar as we go. And the webinar will also be recorded so that others may be able to find this information over the coming weeks. And I think, Ashley, you might put the link into the chat box for accessing the captioning. So today we're talking about a new set of guidelines produced by the New South Wales Government for presenting outdoor events. We're also joined by John Bailey, who's the Head of Production for the Sydney Festival, to talk about planning for an outdoor program that's a key part of the festival this year. I'm also going to be covering off information about applying for an exemption for events that are currently not permitted under the public health order, and also changes that have been implemented this week around digital record keeping, as well as some information that's recently been changed about advice for singing outdoors. But before we start off on the main topic, I'll quickly cover off the new rules about digital record keeping. So the changes to the public health order requirements around businesses to electronic check-in their customers or their patrons have been mandatory as of Monday this week. So customer check-ins at businesses or venues must be completed using electronic methods. So this means that pen and paper check-ins are no longer allowed. So there has been a lot of questions about how this relates to organisations who use ticketing systems. It's fairly explicit in the public health order now that electronic registering of a person's contact details may be through the use of a QR code or another electronic method that records the person's name, their telephone number or email address, and the time at which the person entered the premises. So there's actually a time requirement on that now. There are some other conditions around this if you're unable to fulfil these requirements. So if a person is unable to provide contact details, for example, due to age or language barriers, another person may provide contact details on their behalf. And if there are unexpected circumstances which prevent the use of electronic methods, such as a power outage, any paper records must be entered into an electronic format such as a spreadsheet within 12 hours. So as an option for businesses, Service New South Wales have developed an app for COVID-safe check-in. So every time a business registers its COVID-safe plan on the New South Wales website, you'll automatically be sent a QR code for your business. And the benefit of using this system is that you're not giving your customers information to a third-party marketer. I don't know about you guys, but I've signed myself up to a few things accidentally over the last couple of months. And this also provides a kind of seamless transition of data to New South Wales Health. So it actually removes a whole sort of chunk of time that is usually taken if they're trying to contact trace through third-party products. And it's basically seen to be very safe in terms of your details being used only for the purpose of contact tracing. So if anyone has any questions about this in particular, I invite you to ask those now. And if there isn't, we can go on to the public health order relating to outdoor events. And I have to take you through quite a bit of content for this. So I might ask Ashley now if you can allow me to be the presenter, because I'll go through this via the websites that have this information. Okay, so in the first place, I'm going to take you through the public health order itself, because it does actually contain a bit more information on some particular issues where the guidelines aren't so specific. So the public health order states that a controlled outdoor public gathering means an outdoor public gathering in an area, the enclosed area, that is A, enclosed or bounded by fencing or another form of barrier, and B, that access to this place is controlled by way of a ticket. So those are the key issues, is that it's somehow bound, so you have entry points that limit how people can get into the area, and that you have a ticket. Secondly, the Minister directs that the organiser of an outdoor public gathering must have and comply with the COVID-19 safety plan and the checklist, and I'll take you through the checklist that is specific to this public health order. And B, that you keep a copy of your COVID-19 safety plan so that you may make it available to an authorised officer or a police officer as requested. The Minister directs that the organiser of a controlled outdoor public gathering must ensure that all persons participating in the gathering, other than persons engaged in work, are assigned specific seats or a seating area. So, number 4, the Minister directs that the organiser of a controlled outdoor public gathering must ensure that the maximum number of persons participating in the gathering is the lesser of the following. So the number of persons that is equivalent to into a seated space of 1 person per 2 square metres, and for gatherings of 1 person per 4 square metres where seating isn't provided. So this will be in relation to outlines that are made on the ground, or picnic blankets or other forms of demarcation, and that the limit is 3,000 people. There's also another clause in here, and the Minister directs that the organiser of a controlled outdoor public gathering must ensure that the gathering does not last longer than 5 hours. So this is the contingencies basically around that in the public health order. So now what I'll take you through is the guidelines that are available for this, and then we can have some questions and Q&As after this, as I'm sure you'll have lots of questions about it. So we'll just go now to the guidelines, and these are on the New South Wales Government Health website, coronavirus website. It's all located in this COVIDSafe webpage of the New South Wales Government website. And as you scroll down this page, you'll see that there are a number of, quite a growing number of different kinds of businesses that have guidelines assigned. I might have just joined. Oh, thank you. Thank you for turning off your microphone, whoever that was. So as you scroll down, you'll see there's quite a number of different guidelines around here, and you need to go to controlled outdoor events for this particular one. So basically the main specification around this is how many people are allowed. So your attendance for events where attendees are assigned to a seat is 3,000 patrons or 1 patron per 2 square metres, whichever is less. So you can have up to 3,000 at 2 metres per person, 2 square metres per person at these events. If you have basically some kind of demarcation on the ground, for instance, a picnic blanket or a chalk circle or a chalk square or something like that to designate where people sit, that is 3,000 patrons per 4 square metres of space. So the way to find out then more information and to get your COVID safety plan together for this kind of event, you need to then click onto this button, which then takes you through more information. And this takes you to the COVID-19 safety plan for controlled outdoor events. So as with all COVID safety plans that have been, and checklists that have been issued by the New South Wales government, they basically contain 4 components. One of them is the wellbeing of staff and customers. The next is physical distancing. The next is hygiene and cleaning, and then you have your record keeping, which we've just gone through. So I'm going to take you through physical distancing because this is, I guess, the key facet of this guideline, which is different from the guidelines that have been before. So we'll just go through this, which gives you most of the information that you need to know. Excuse me, it's a lot of talking and a lot of information, but please don't hesitate to ask questions in the link in the chat box as I go. So for events where attendees are assigned to a seat, the capacity must not exceed 1 person per 2 square metres to a maximum of 3,000 people. For events without fixed seats, attendees must be allocated to a designated seating area, i.e. where the grass is marked or on picnic rugs, and the capacity must not exceed 1 person per 4 square metres to a maximum of 3,000 people. So capacity in any indoor areas, so we've already had a couple of questions about this that have come through. So if you have marquee on site, you might not exceed the space there and the allocation of people in that area by 1 person per 4 square metres at any time. So you need to ensure that the performance, including group singing and physical distancing between performers and between the audience, complies with the most recent advice from New South Wales Health. So this is mainly, it's 1.5 metres, but if you have singers on your stage, then the distance from any singer and the next person in front of them must be 5 metres. And for wind instruments that are unreeded, so basically there's a continuous airflow through that instrument, it's 3 metres away from the direction of airflow of that wind instrument. So obviously if you have flautists and their flutes are playing behind them, then the distance actually is still just 1.2 metres, not 3 metres between the audience and that person. So it's all about how you angle that person on the stage, I think. So you need to ensure, for organisers, you need to ensure that your audience members comply with 1.5 metres physical distance where practical. particularly at your queuing points, such as your drink stations and toilets and your entrances and exits. So you might want to consider how your seating arrangements can support physical distancing. And it's indicated here that people who live in the same household are not required to distance from each other. So I guess in the case where people are booking picnic blanket areas for their families, then they're not required to be physically distant. You need to reduce crowding wherever possible and promote physical distancing with markers where people are required to stand. So your bathroom facilities, your food and drink outlets, and you need to promote online ticket purchasing and electronic ticket purchasing where this is available, and use rope barriers to mark your entry and exits where practicable. And in discussion with New South Wales Health, if you do have separate entry and egress points, this is also preferred, and you've probably seen this around a lot of places, venues where they have a separate door for entry and a separate door for exit. You need to have strategies in place to avoid people mingling and reduce the contact between different groups of people where possible. So this could be facilitated by separating audiences into smaller allocated seating areas. So I guess that would be a sort of grouping where once an audience is seated, it sort of can't cross over then into another audience seating area. You must ensure that your audience members remain seated throughout the performance, and dance floors sadly are not permitted. So if there are security bag checking arrangements in place, you need to have strategies, again, to minimise crowding around queuing, and if you have additional staffing to ask people to open their bags, you need to be able to provide sanitizer and other sorts of equipment for your staff to use before and after they do that. And wherever possible, and this is the same in every COVID safe checklist, you ask your staff to maintain 1.5 metres physical distancing at all times where possible, and stagger your sort of staff break times to minimise close contact. So if you have high volume areas such as at ticketing counters or scanning places, if you're able to put plexiglass around counters or protect your staff in other ways if they're working in significant public health, public interaction roles, that they wear face masks if that's possible. You need to have some strategies in place to manage the gatherings that might occur straight after a performance is over. And if you're also working on an event that will have an impact on public transport, so for instance, if you're putting an event in a place where there's only one train station that's not very well serviced, you need to think about the strategies for getting your patrons out of there without putting a big impact on your train service. So I'd encourage you to sort of stay in contact with Transport New South Wales around that. You might want to encourage private transport options if that's a possibility for you, and to possibly include parking options and a ticket price that includes a parking option to support that. And the rest of it is kind of your usual COVID safe behaviour, to use telephone or video for essential staff meetings where you can, and to review regular deliveries and request contactless deliveries and invoicing where that's practical. So that's the main detail around the controlled outdoor events up to 3,000 people in terms of physical distancing. Most of the other information remains the same. So if you are intending to provide food and other sorts of outlets inside this context, you'll need to be looking at those hospitality guidelines to support how you you undertake the provision of those sorts of services in your event. So I might now ask if there are any questions in particular on this. And there are a couple already in the chat, so I can address those now. So there's a question from Katie about the 5-hour duration. What time is it taken from? I would suggest the official start time of the event, or I think it's designed to limit how long people are in the venue and are at a potential sort of risk of mingling with each other. And I think this also relates to the consumption of alcohol as well. So if you have an event that runs over a longer period of time where there are bars everywhere, then there's I guess a reasonable expectation that people will drink alcohol, and we've all seen this pan out, I think, over the last couple of months that we've been reopened again to events, is that it's very difficult to control crowd behaviour once people have had a couple of drinks. And so I imagine that time frame is based upon that. So you might want to consider that that's from when people enter the venue to when they leave. Yeah. Are there any other questions so far on this? I don't have any at the moment, so I might wait until I see if there's anything up ahead. So Gary from Newcastle has asked about how outdoor is defined. So I think I did cover off some questions about temporary pavilions. So the temporary pavilion would be included within that outdoor framework. However, it is limited to the 4 square metres per person rule. There's a link to the form, yes. I think that we have them in the slides, but I can post them into the chat now so that you can have a look at those. So I've just posted that into the chat so that you can take a look at those details, and I'm also going to put the link into the public health order as well, so that you have access to that. I also just quickly wanted to run through some new details around singing just before we talk with John, who has some much more interesting things to say than I do. But there are new guidelines in relation to singing outdoors. So singing indoors, as the advice is still that a maximum of 5 people can sing together, socially distanced 1.5 metres, all facing in the same direction. There is now a provision for outdoors for up to 30 people to sing together. So I'll just talk you through the wording of that, because it does also allow for the fact that you may have people singing along with you, particularly in the case of carolling. So for a group of 30 people that may perform together in a singing group outdoors, if all singers face forwards and not towards each other, if they have physical distancing of 1.5 metres between each other and any other performers, and 5 metres from all other people, including the audience and conductor. If the event is where the audience or congregation are likely to participate in singing, audience members and congregants 12 years or older should wear a face mask. So those are the main sorts of issues around that. So Gary has asked a question about how long the public health order lasts in New South Wales. It does, my understanding is once these guidelines are up, unless we have a situation in which things have to roll backwards in terms of restrictions, that they will continue to be available and that information will still apply into next year. But the current public health order does actually run out on the 24th of December this year. So now I'd like to introduce our guest this morning. So Ashley, you can take me off presenting, or maybe I can do that. Let me see if I can. Thank you. So now I would like to introduce our guest this morning. If you're there, John, please turn on your camera. John Bailey. Hello.
Hi, hello.
So this is John Bailey. John is the head of production at the Sydney Festival, and he's going to take us through a bit of a case study for an outdoor event program. And John, thanks so much for joining us today. You must be so busy. We've got only a month to go. And we're all really delighted that the Sydney Festival was able to happen this year. And it has the tagline Australian Made, so we're really excited about seeing some local and Australian work in the summertime. And so you're working on quite a significant outdoor venue in Barangaroo for the festival. So I'll invite you now to take over and talk us through it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Beck. Thanks, everyone. Yes, we're one of the very, very lucky arts organisations who got through our festival last January and then went into hibernation, as we normally do every year, and then started to plan for a most unusual festival in 2021. It's been, I think it's been a hell of a year for everybody, but it's been very productive for us in many ways because we've engaged with so many fantastic local companies, and we've also commissioned a lot of local work, and it's been in many ways a terrific glass festival for Wesley Enoch. I think better than he thought it was going to be in March, that's for sure. I just want to start by saying huge thank you to Beck Dean and Create New South Wales, who've had our back through this entire process when we were dreaming of doing this event site when it wasn't at all possible. And also the people at Infrastructure New South Wales, particularly their events team, Tamara and Matt and David, who have been incredible because this is not what they would normally do on this site, but they recognise it's a very unusual year and that they wanted to do something special. And so this is that something special. So what was our goal? We wanted to do a large outdoor event. We wanted it to be multi-art form. We wanted it to be accessible to the public. We wanted it to be an iconic, immediately accessible or understandable Sydney location. We most importantly wanted it to be live because I think all of us are well done with Zoom sessions, well done with them, and particularly watching shows on Zoom is really, not that interesting, we felt. We initially started, and so just to say out loud, we initially started with free. And then when we thought about it, we realised we were only going to have a limited number of tickets that would be available. And we were concerned that people would treat free the way they usually treat free. That is, about 33% of people just simply don't turn up for the show. And so we went with a price that was basically very like you would pay at the movies, $25. We thought that was enough that people would care about that seat that they were about to buy, that they would either use it or they would give it away to somebody else, but also be accessible for a large number of people. We have some community nights for some of the shows, particularly for our big Indigenous show. So when we started to think about the effects of COVID on this event site and on presenting an outdoor event site, we talked about what were the things that we needed to break the plan down into. And it basically broke down into forcing patrons to distance. So, and by forcing, I mean that would be barriers of some kind or a mark on the ground or similar, giving patrons room to manage their own physical distancing, putting in place contact tracing options. We've gone in particular with the Service New South Wales app, which means that whenever a person scans that QR code, it goes directly to Service New South Wales, which cuts out the middleman. With a lot of the QR codes, they're caught in a database somewhere. You then need to upload them. You also need to manage I think it's 28 days. You can only hold that information for. You have to get rid of it. And so we're big fans of the Service New South Wales app. And of course, there are steps around that you'll need to have in place for people who either don't have a smartphone or don't know how to use their smartphone, don't have the app, etc., etc. We can talk about I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. We also recognised we needed some way for people to sanitise and sanitising stations. We also needed staff that were trained. It's very important that they understand what COVID symptoms are and that they're empowered to encourage compliance with the patrons. We needed a front of house solution for people that were presenting with symptoms so that they could be taken aside, ask some questions, and most importantly, we put in place ticketing conditions to allow us to refuse entry. When we first discussed this, it was so difficult because refusal of entry is really against a not-for-profit charity like the Sydney Festival's way of behaving. But we recognised that one positive COVID case could pretty much take down the festival, particularly if it was given to a staff member. And most of our venues have places like Carriageworks and the Seymour Centre, etc., have multiple theatres in them. And so we realised very quickly that we needed to have the ability to be able to be proactive in terms of stopping infection. Okay, so on the screen here, this is the site at Barangaroo. It's called Barangaroo North. Hopefully that will be playing as a video. This is the stage that we're placing right at the water. It'll have a large artwork on the back, not that one, that was last year's artwork. And then this hill here has got underneath it, it's hollow, it's got a place called the Cutaway. And so this was going to be the patron experience when we started. So when we started this journey, the plan was that we would be putting people on the grass, socially distanced, at 4 square metres. Now, as Beck was saying earlier, we're now allowed to have patrons at 2 square metres, which is fantastic and was what we were kind of aiming from right from the beginning, mainly because at 4 square metres, it's very tricky to kind of allocate seats to people, to manage a ticketing system where you might have 6 people in a group or 4 people in a group or 3 people in a group. When you're working at 2 square metres, it means that you could actually have a seat for each person or a position for each person, and the people aren't too far away from each other. They can actually stay in these like individual pods, I guess is the best way of describing it. But I'll get to talking about the seating in a second. Oh, sorry, I'll just pause that. So what were the issues that we had to solve? We had to have audience access to the site, which included COVID-19 screening. So the Cutaway that I just mentioned, which was below that hill, which is a blessing in this situation because it's open to the outside air, but it's actually covered. There are large vented openings up one side of the Cutaway, which means there's excellent airflow through the space and ventilation. And it's also huge. It's 12 metres high to the ceiling, and there's a very large smooth cement floor, plenty of room, and it's very, very open. So that allowed us to do distance queuing. We'll still be putting in place bollards, fencing, etc., to ensure that people queue, and we'll be putting marks on the floor. People will go through this race, a queuing race. They'll check in, we'll take their tickets, we'll wristband them, and each member of the audience, groups of members of the audience will get a coloured wristband. I'll talk about that in a second. any person who presents with symptoms, they'll be separated off into another area. At that point, they'll be asked a series of questions. They'll be temperature checked, and we intend to be very firm with edge cases. But most patrons, all that they'll need to do will take their ticket to ensure that they were ticketed. We'll make sure that they've checked in. We'll ask them to sanitise. And we'll put their wristband on, or we'll give them a wristband that they can put on. Again, all of our staff back of house, including all of our bump-in staff, everybody, at this point in time, we're planning for those people to be masked. Of course, it's the middle of summer. We've found little 3D printable mask frames which fit with the blue masks that you see, the disposable masks. Those are much more comfortable to wear in work situations and when it's particularly hot. So we'll be using that system with a lot of our staff so that they'll be comfortable in their masks. So that's getting the audience in. Our next thing that we were thinking about was what's the audience experience going to be, of the show, the catering and the toilets. Pretty early on in the festival, we recognised that interval was definitely not going to be a thing. And so virtually every festival show, not just here at the Headland stage, but everywhere, is somewhere between 75 and 90 minutes with no interval. We've also at the Headland installed screens. There's two screens one screen on either side, and then a huge screen at the back of the stage. That allows us to do a number of art forms. The stage itself is very big. It's a 22-metre opening, 16 metres deep, but it's 2 metres high because sight lines up the hill are quite difficult to get right, and we wanted people to be able to see. But of course, that's no good for dance. And so the screens and cameras are how we're going to solve that problem for that art form. But also it allowed us to do shows that have a large video component. Like, for instance, the Sydney Symphony Orchestra is doing a version of the Four Seasons that has a video element as part of the show, as does there's a show about George Michael, which also has a big video component. So those that gives us a lot more ability to do a lot of different art forms, because we didn't want to just be stuck with music outdoors, which is usually what you end up doing on an outdoor stage. So we'll be doing dance, cabaret, physical theatre, as well as music, of course. Then we got to the point of distance seating, and there were a few considerations here. We wanted the audience and the stage to have some connection, so we didn't want the audience to be too far away. We recognised that we needed the seating to be allocated in some manner, and we needed an easy way, we felt, to tell people where they had to sit. So we started with the 4 metre idea, and in the 4 metre idea, we were going to basically put crosses on the ground and then encourage people to if they come with 5 people, they count 5 crosses, and that's their area, and they would sit together, on those crosses. It wasn't a particularly great solution, but then we came up with this 2 square metre pod idea, and that is this idea. Hopefully you can see this. So this is the lovely Nathalie. Nathalie is one of the production managers working here. So our pod is 1 metre wide and 2 metres long. Now, what this is effectively is an indoor theatre seating situation. So Nathalie's sitting on the first seat. There's a seat either side of her that is empty, and then there's the next person. So that piece of tape on the ground with the little line marking on it is kind of where we think the bottom of the next person was going to land in this pod. That means that there is distance that they would be in a theatre, but they're outdoors, and so we figured that would be, excellent for ventilation and airflow. Now, of course, on this headland, we've worked out that with good sightlines, we can fit 1,776 people. But how were we going to mark this out? Were we going to mark out these pods? Well, what we came up with in the end was, again, just crosses. So we're just putting crosses basically where you put your bum. So if you put your bum on the cross, then you're automatically socially distanced. And as you can see, Nathalie's not that far from her partner who's right next to her. And so the plan was that we would ask everybody to socially distance, that we weren't going to try and put people into family groups or into twos or threes or whatever, because it's a complete nightmare for the ticketing system. It's just far too difficult to do. And also it's very difficult then to react to changes we felt in the health orders. Sideline here, or sidebar here, in theatres, we're doing 2 seats on and 2 seats off. The reason is because the vast bulk of people book as a couple. So that allowed us to always let people have, their 2 seats. If they come as a 4, then they've still got someone else, who they've travelled with, who's come with them to the show, who's right next to them. So they could sit in these groups of 2, so 2 on, 2 off. But also it gives us the flexibility, should the situation arise that we get 100% back in the theatres, that we can easily fill in the gaps with people, with couples at a later date. Okay, so so where am I up to? Yeah, so we got to these the 2 metre by 2 metre pod idea, and we pitched that in, and I think everybody thought that it was a really good idea. And then we started to think about, well, how is this going to work? Is what Nathalie's sitting on A1, and then next to her is A2, and actually it was when we started thinking about the audience travel through the venue, and I can't emphasise enough how really important this is. We literally role played it in here like we marked up this pod on the ground. We said, okay, so what happens now, and who's looking after them, and how long are they in contact, and are they touching each other, and what are they touching, and all of that stuff. It's really good to do all of those things. So we did all of those things, and there was just this point we got to where, hang on, we've checked their ticket once, they go up to the top of the headland, they get told, oh, you're in section A, go down to section A. Oh, okay, just queue here for a second, because I have to look at all these people's tickets to work out where they're sitting. It was turning into a complete nightmare. So instead what we came up with was the wristbanding idea, and also this idea, which hopefully will come up on your screens. So this is not exactly the colours that we've ended up with, but it gives you an idea of what we were doing. So each area corresponds to a wristband colour. In each area, roughly, there's 200 of our little X's that I was talking about earlier. And you can notice that each area is also bounded geographically in some way, either by a hard path, that boot path, for instance, is a hard tarmac, or something that we've marked on the ground to create aisles so that people can get out. One of the great upsides of the 2 metre long pod is that it puts in place these very large aisles for people to move around in the space and manage their own social distancing. And so effectively what will happen now is the person, so the cutaway, they come out of the cutaway from under the hill, they go up the stairs or up a lift. We have a lift that makes it accessible. When they come out the top of the lift, there's a person there who says, just make your way to the flag that is the colour of your wristband. And so they've got, their wristband, and they can see the flags which are, flapping in the wind on each of the areas. And so off the person goes. There is heaps of room so they can manage their own social distancing. When they get to that area, there's a person there that is just ensuring that people are taking up every space. Now, what's happened since we came up with this plan is being outdoor in 2 square metres has been restricted to being on a physical chair. You can do 4 square metres with picnic blankets, etc., but only 2 square metres you need a chair. We really wanted the 2 square metres because of what we're doing, because we're on stage, because effectively what we're doing is a show outside. It's not music or, our symphony orchestra concert that we do outside, which is very much a picnic event where you kind of float in and out of the action. This is something where we're expecting people will want to be focused on the stage. It's very much like being in a normal theatre. And so for that reason, we wanted to lay it out with people close to each other and feeling like they were kind of in a theatre environment. The seats will really help us. Amazingly, we managed to find from a company called EPS seats, chairs, folding chairs, which are usable on a grassy slope. And they're actually quite flexible too for how steep that slope is. So we have chairs now for every single patron, but we're sticking with the cross idea. So the chairs are actually not attached to each other. They're sitting on the cross, and so the chairs are socially distanced. It looks like to protect the grass, we may have to put them away every night and put them out every afternoon. But that's fine because we're employing people in the industry, and that's the important thing. The other thing to talk about was, let's have a little look. Wristbanding, yeah, too much. Oh yeah, what that did was it avoided all of that queuing and formalised entry. It meant that all we had to do was ensure that people filled up all of the gaps in the seating, and also the patrons were remembered where they were sitting. So it's one of the things that we've been talking about is at the front of house, we need to make sure that they know where they're sitting. The other thing that we had to work on was our back of house COVID procedures. As I've already mentioned, we've gone with masks as mandatory. Also, the back of house entry procedure is much more thorough in all of our theatres. All the people we, of course, contact traced, they will be temperature checked. They'll be asked a series of questions that they'll have to answer, and they'll be given like a little dot or a marker so that we know that they've been through our stage door. In any theatre that we're working in, anyone who wants to interact with anybody back of house will have to come through the stage door. We're going to be pretty strict about people just turning up to kind of drop in and see their friend Fred. That won't be happening. And of course, backstage hospitality won't be happening. We'll be doing all of our artist hospitality in a seated venue off-site for the most part. The other thing that we've put in place for staff who are on calls, who are casual staff in particular, if a casual staff member rings in and says, look, they're feeling unwell, they've got a dry throat, they've got a persistent cough, they've got a temperature, then what we're doing is saying, if you go off and get tested, we will pay you a 4-hour call. That we then ask to see proof that they've been tested or to see the results of the test, and we'll pay the call. That's just so that people feel like they're not going to be disadvantaged if they feel that they have to go and get a COVID test. There is, of course, the danger that the staff might use that, for a day off, but they still get the call. But let's be honest, that's going to be a real edge case that's likely to do that. And in our case, because we're only running for 3 weeks, we feel that it's well worth paying that call for that in that situation. The other thing that we've had to do is do a thing we're calling COVID plan alignment. We're asking all of our performing companies to provide us with their COVID safe plan. So, of course, we've got a physical theatre performing company on stage. They'll be touching each other. It's unavoidable. And so those companies are putting in place a plan to pretty much put themselves in a bubble. Fortunately, the companies are from interstate, so they'll be staying in a hotel. We'll be picking them up in a bus. When they arrive here, our staff that have to interact with them will be masked. So effectively what we're attempting to do is to bubble those companies as best we can for the time that they're performing with us. The final thing we had to get right was our wet weather plans. While it's not so much a COVID thing, it is something that people will be concerned about. The seats will help a great deal. We'll have ponchos on sale at the site. And also, again, the cutaway for us is terrific because it means that we can delay the performance, particularly if it's around start time, and people will be able to stay, out of the rain. And this is the last thing that I'm dealing with this week. This is the things you just can't ever see coming. Plainly, this is not what we're doing, but this is what's in all of our advertising. It was in our advertising because this is kind of what we thought we were going to be doing with the 4 square metre thing, but now we're going to be doing quite formal seating. And this is just sending completely now, unfortunately, the wrong message. And so we're having to sit with our marketing team and get this sorted out. So there's a lot of things that we have to deal with, particularly when it's constantly changing. And that's it, Beck, from me.
Thank you so much. That was so thorough and amazing. And I guess it just really highlights that the enormous amount of logistical kind of addition that you do to an already logistical intensive kind of event planning. So yeah, it's great to see the innovation around the thinking about how to do this, and I think sharing this kind of plan is really it's a wonderful thing to be able to offer other organisations through coming onto this webinar. So really thank you for that so much.
No problem.
And so there's a couple of questions that are in the chat. One of them is about event ticketing software for supporting distancing and allocated seating and spots where there's vacancies. I think where you describe the system that you're using, or you describe the process of how you're seating people indoors, which is really smart and very kind of it's kind of like the least problematic way, I think, of going about that, particularly in the light of potential changes to health orders. Is there anything else that you've encountered to support people to do that booking?
Can I be honest? I think you should have Tara on from here, who looks after our booking, because honestly, it was massive. It was massive. Yeah. And Tara, it took us a long time, a lot of creative thinking, which, let's be honest, when you do ticketing, there's usually not a lot of creative thinking for us required. It's very much like technical work, a lot of our technical work. It's very much, what you're doing, there's a procedure, this is how things get done. And so, I think that they've had a really interesting time getting it to work with our ticketing system. Our ticketing system really, which is Enter, wasn't able to deal with the idea of the dynamic ticketing idea. We were going to have to manually reseat people, so people would sort of say, hey, I'm buying 4 tickets to this show. And then when we, maybe, I don't know, a couple of days out, we were going to then go, okay, now there's 4 people here, and then there's a gap, then there's 2 people, and over the number of shows that we've got, which is shows that we're directly managing, it's 52 or so now, and then we've got another 60 shows that we're umbrellaing this year, which is far more than we would normally umbrella, just so that we can get the word out and as much Australian artwork, Sydney artwork that's happening as we can in January.
Yeah, that's so okay. So we have to software Tara then, I guess. Yes, we have to put her out to production.
It's worth to get it to come in, because we're on sale now, and she has been talking a lot about the things that she's hit. I've heard a rumor that, is it the Opera or the SSO, one or the other of them have come up with a dynamic seating system that they're pretty happy with. I think that's on Tessitura though. Not everybody has Tessitura.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. There was a question about the company that's supplying you fold-up chairs, and that was EPS.
That's EPS. I'm sorry to tell you, we may have most of them in January, but they are well worth talking about. And the chairs are almost miraculous. It's a fixed angle, but it seems to work on a heap of different slopes because this Barangaroo has a lot of different angles. So, yeah, they're very good.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so very much for joining us today. I know that you're super busy, so I don't want to keep you for any longer than you need to stay online. The final thing I was going to talk about today was just in the case of organisations that are seeking to undertake events that are not currently covered in the public health order, you do have to go through an exemption process if you do want to undertake to do this. And it is by no means guaranteed. There is a fair amount of work involved, obviously, in putting anything like this together. But the portal for this and the way to find out information on this is on this page, and I will just put this link into the chat box. It's a Planning COVID Safe Major Events page, so it takes you through information about the Major Events Task Force, particular news and updates, and then there's a subject heading that you can press called exemption requests. And then you should follow this basically, but it's, as it shows you here, exemption requests are based upon the current public health order. So the current public health order expires on the 24th of December. And in order to get an exemption granted, you need to be providing a very compelling reason why there are exceptional circumstances for your particular event. So there is an online contact form here that you can go through for an exemption request, which takes you through the basics of your request. And then once you've put in that submission, you'll then be sent an email that will ask you for more substantive information. So that's really it for today. That's the end today of this webinar. If you do have any questions, I think actually you can take me off presenter and put up the final slide if you still have it. If you do have any questions about this or any other COVID-19 and arts related question, you can give me a call or send me an email. We do have a slideshow that has my email address on it, I think. Ashley, when you've got a chance to put up the slideshow again.
Sorry, just trying to get it up now. Beck.
Right. No worries. Yeah, so this is my direct email address. So if you do want to contact me about anything to do with COVID-19 and what you're able to do under the current public health order and any other questions, please get in touch. The other way that you can stay in touch about our offerings here at Create New South Wales is to get on our mailing list. So unfortunately, I'm not able to spam people about our webinar series. You need to actually join up. So if you go onto the Create New South Wales website, there's a little section on the right-hand side that you can put your details into, and you can join our mailing list and be kept up to date with all of this stuff. So thanks for joining us today, and have a safe few weeks, and hopefully see you again. Okay.